The rain came down in sheets, an unrelenting cascade that seemed to swallow the city whole. The streets glistened like black glass, reflecting the fractured light of distant street lamps. My breath fogged the air as I hurried along the winding alley, my umbrella battling against the wind's bitter bite. I didn't know where I was going, not really. I had walked this route countless times before, but tonight, it felt different. The world seemed quieter, darker, the night pressing against me like a living thing. And then I saw it. The shop was small, almost hidden, nestled between two dilapidated buildings that seemed ready to collapse under the weight of their years. Its windows glowed faintly, a dim amber light spilling out onto the slick pavement. Above the door hung a sign, its paint cracked and peeling. L'arcane. Curiosity, or desperation perhaps, urged me forward. My feet moved before my mind could catch up, the shop's allure pulling me in like a whisper in the dark. The bell above the door tinkled as I stepped inside, and the air changed. It was warmer here, heavy with the scent of dried herbs and something metallic. Shelves lined the walls, crammed with glass jars and bottles, filled with substances I couldn't begin to name. Candles flickered in iron sconces, their flames casting long, dancing shadows that made the space feel alive. At the counter stood a man. He was tall and thin, his skin pallid and stretched too tightly over angular bones. His eyes glinted like polished obsidian as he watched me approach, his smile sharp and knowing. "Lost, are we?" he asked, his voice smooth but carrying an undertone that set my teeth on edge. I hesitated, unsure of what to say. The truth felt too raw to voice aloud. "I need something." His smile widened, as though he'd been expecting me. They always do. I faltered, glancing around at the countless oddities filling the shop. "Do you have anything that can make someone fall in love?" The words sounded absurd as I said them, but I didn't care. All I could think of was her, how she didn't notice me, how I was invisible in her eyes. The man's expression didn't change, but there was a flicker of something in his gaze. Amusement? Pity? "Love," he murmured, drawing the word out as though tasting it. "Ah, yes, the most dangerous of all pursuits." He turned, his movements fluid, almost unnatural, and retrieved a small vial from a shelf behind him. The liquid inside shimmered faintly, a deep red that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. "This," he said, placing it on the counter, "is what you seek. A single drop will bind their heart to yours." I stared at the vial, unease prickling at the back of my neck. "And it's safe?" The man chuckled softly, a sound that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Love is never safe, my dear, but it is potent." Despite the warning, I slid the money across the counter. The man's fingers brushed mine as he handed me the vial, and I shivered at the coldness of his touch. "Remember," he said as I turned to leave, "what is given cannot be undone." It was a week later when I finally used the potion. The vial had burned a hole in my pocket, its weight a constant reminder of my growing desperation. I couldn't stop thinking about her laughter, her eyes, the way she lit up every room she entered. The thought of her not noticing me was unbearable, and the potion promised a solution. The cafe was nearly empty when I arrived, the faint hum of conversation mingling with the hiss of the espresso machine. She sat by the window, a book in her hands, her hair catching the golden light of the setting sun. My heart pounded as I approached, my fingers gripping the vial hidden in my jacket pocket. "Hey, Sophie," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. She looked up, her expression softening into a smile. "Hi, Alex. What's up?" "Mind if I sit?" She gestured to the chair across from her, and I slid into it, forcing myself to act casual. We chatted for a while, and it felt almost normal, almost like she was already mine. When her attention drifted back to her book, I seized the moment. "Here," I said, setting a cup of tea before her. "Thought you could use a refill." She thanked me, her smile making my chest ache. As she sipped, I waited, every nerve in my body taut with anticipation. I had added a single drop, just as the shopkeeper had instructed. At first, nothing happened, but then something shifted. Her gaze met mine, and her smile lingered longer than it should have. Her voice softened, her laughter more frequent. By the end of the evening, she was leaning closer, her hand brushing mine as though by accident. It worked. The next few days were a whirlwind. Sophie was everywhere, calling, texting, showing up at my door with a brightness that filled every dark corner of my life. At first, it was exhilarating. She wanted me. She saw me. But then, it began to change. Her texts came at all hours, her calls incessant. When we weren't together, she left messages that grew increasingly frantic. She showed up unannounced, her eyes wide and searching, as if the sight of me was the only thing keeping her grounded. "Alex," she whispered one night, clutching my hands tightly in hers. "You're everything to me. I die without you." Her words should have been sweet, but instead, they lodged in my throat like a thorn. Her love wasn't warm or comforting. It was suffocating. And deep in her gaze, behind the devotion, I began to see something else, something darker. Sophie's obsession deepened in ways I hadn't imagined. At first, it was small things, calls that lingered too long, questions that felt too intimate. But those gestures soon grew into something more unsettling, as though she wasn't just captivated by me, but consumed. One morning, I woke to find her sitting on my porch. The sun had barely risen, the sky streaked with faint orange hues. She was huddled in her coat, her eyes wide and glassy. "I couldn't sleep," she said, her voice trembling. I needed to see you." Her presence felt heavier than it should have, like the air around her had thickened. I forced a smile and invited her in, trying to mask the unease creeping up my spine. Sophie seemed almost feverish, her movements jerky, her gaze fixed on me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. She sat close, too close, her fingers brushing mine every chance she got. I tried to pull away gently, but her grip tightened, her nails digging into my wrist. "You won't leave me, will you?" she whispered, her tone desperate. I laughed nervously, disentangling my hand. "Of course not. Why would I?" She didn't answer, but the look in her eyes was far from reassured. As the days passed, Sophie's behavior grew stranger. She always knew where I was, showing up at work with coffee or waiting outside the gym. Once I found her in my apartment, rearranging my bookshelves. "How did you get in?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. She blinked at me, as if the question didn't make sense. "You gave me a key, remember?" I hadn't. That night, I returned to the shop. The sign above the door creaked in the wind, its faded letters seeming darker in the dim light. Inside, the air felt heavier than before, the shadows deeper. The shopkeeper emerged from the back room, his expression unreadable. "Ah," he said softly, his voice curling through the air like smoke. "I wondered when you'd return." "This isn't normal," I said, placing the vial, now empty, on the counter. "She's not herself. She's everywhere. It's like she's attached to me." The man chuckled, a dry sound that sent a chill down my spine. "You asked for love, did you not?" "This isn't love," I snapped. "It's something else, something wrong." His smile widened, and his eyes glinted with that unsettling amusement. "Love is not what you thought it would be, is it? It is not gentle, it is not kind. It is hunger, a consuming force that demands everything." I want to undo it, I said firmly. There has to be a way. The man leaned closer, the air between us sharp with the scent of herbs and iron. To break the bond, you must return what you have taken. But know this, love, once given, does not leave quietly. His words lingered long after I left the shop. Sophie's behavior grew more erratic. She called me dozens of times a day, her voice trembling with desperation. She appeared at odd hours, her eyes hollow and pleading. And worse, I began to notice strange things, shadows that moved when they shouldn't, the sound of whispers in empty rooms. One night, as I tried to sleep, I felt a weight beside me. My heart leapt into my throat as I turned, only to find Sophie lying there, her face inches from mine. I can't be without you, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. You're everything. I couldn't breathe. The sight of her lying so close, her wide eyes glinting in the faint moonlight, filled me with a dread I couldn't shake. Sophie, I said, sitting up and pulling the covers around me. You can't keep doing this. Her face crumpled, tears spilling down her cheeks. You don't understand, she whispered. I need you, Alex. You're my reason for everything. I wanted to comfort her, to tell her things would be okay, but the words caught in my throat. I couldn't lie, not anymore. The next day, I called in sick to work and drove out of town, my mind racing. The shopkeeper's words played over and over in my head. Return what you have taken. What did that mean? How could I give back something I hadn't fully understood to begin with? The woods outside the city were quiet, the kind of stillness that felt unnatural. I wandered among the trees, the vial clutched in my hand as if it might offer some guidance. The further I went, the colder the air became, each breath frosting in the sunlight. When I stopped to catch my breath, I saw it. A figure stood in the distance, shadowed among the trees. At first, I thought it was Sophie, but as I stepped closer, I realized it wasn't human. Its outline shimmered faintly, as though it was more shadow than substance, its face obscured by an inky haze. You cannot undo love, it said, its voice a low hum that seemed to vibrate through the air. You asked, and it was given. You are bound. I stumbled back, my chest tight with panic. There has to be a way. The figure tilted its head, almost curiously. Love cannot be erased, it said, only transferred. Its words echoed in my mind as I drove back home. Sophie was waiting for me, her eyes lighting up when I walked through the door. But as she embraced me, I couldn't feel her warmth. I could only feel the shadow that had followed me, its weight pressing down on us both. And in the depths of her gaze, I saw it again. That flicker of darkness, a silent reminder that the bond was stronger than either of us could comprehend. The days that followed blurred into a suffocating haze, each moment weighed down by Sophie's relentless presence. Her devotion had mutated into something monstrous, something that consumed every ounce of space and air in my life. She was always there, watching, waiting, searching for the reassurance that I could no longer give. I couldn't sleep. The shadows of my apartment stretched unnaturally at night, pooling in corners that had once been mundane. Whispers coiled around the silence, faint and unintelligible, but unmistakably present. The bond wasn't just between us anymore. It was everywhere. One evening, Sophie insisted we go for a walk. The suggestion caught me off guard. She never wanted to leave my side, let alone venture outside. Her excitement was feverish, her hand gripping mine as we strolled through the deserted park. The air was heavy, the moon cloaked by dense clouds. "This is nice," she said, her voice trembling with an edge I couldn't place. I nodded, though my skin prickled with unease. She kept glancing at me, her gaze flickering between joy and something far darker. The edges of her presence felt sharper, more defined, as if she was no longer entirely herself. "I've been thinking," she said suddenly, stopping in the middle of the path. Her grip tightened on my hand. "About us." The words hung in the air, colder than the night around us. "We're meant to be together," she continued, her voice lilting in a way that sent chills down my spine. "Forever. Don't you see that?" I tried to pull my hand away, but she held on with a strength that felt unnatural. "Sophie," I said carefully, my voice low. "This isn't normal. This isn't love. Whatever's happening to us, it's not right." Her face twisted, pain and fury flashing in her eyes. For a moment, the world around us seemed to shift, the trees leaning closer, their shadows elongating unnaturally. The bond between us pulsed, a palpable force that tightened like a noose. "But it is love," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "It's the purest kind, unbreakable, eternal." Her words echoed with something not entirely her own, a resonance that reminded me of the shadowed figure in the woods. "I spoke to someone," I confessed, desperation clawing at my throat. "I went back to where I got the potion. They said it can be undone." "You're lying," she shrieked, the sound slicing through the air like a blade. The world around us seemed to tremble, the shadows shifting unnaturally. "You're mine, Alex. You chose this." I stumbled back, finally breaking free of her grasp. The night pressed in, darker and colder than before. The whispers grew louder, swirling in the air around us like a rising storm. Then I saw it. The shadowed figure from the woods stood at the edge of the path, its form even less distinct now, as if it were dissolving into the night itself. Its presence radiated a cold, so sharp it made my breath catch. "This is the price," it said, its voice a deep hum that resonated in my bones. "What was taken cannot be returned without consequence." "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice shaking. The figure tilted its head, its inky outline rippling. "The bond must be transferred. It will not release her. You must take her place." Sophie's hand found mine again, her grip almost burning against the cold. "No," she said, tears streaming down her face. "We don't need to do anything. We're fine. We're perfect." I looked at her, and for the first time I saw it clearly. The darkness that clung to her like a second skin, the way her movements had grown stilted, unnatural. The bond was destroying her, warping her into something else. And it would do the same to me. The figure stepped closer, its shadow stretching across us like a shroud. "Decide," it intoned, "before it is too late." My mind raced, my chest tightening as the weight of the moment bore down on me. I could see the fear in Sophie's eyes, the desperation clawing at her. But beneath it, I saw something else, something darker, something not entirely hers. "I can't," I whispered, the words breaking as they left my lips. The figure seemed to smile, though its face remained a void. "Then it will remain," it said, its voice fading as it dissolved into the night. The bond pulsed one last time, stronger than before, as if cementing itself. Sophie collapsed against me, her body trembling with quiet sobs. "I'll always love you," she murmured, her voice raw. As I held her, the shadows around us began to recede, the whispers fading into the distance. But I knew, deep in my bones, that the bond was far from broken. It had simply settled into place, tightening its grip on us both. As we walked home under the smothering darkness, her hand in mine, I realized the truth. Love, once taken, cannot be undone. It changes. It consumes. And it never lets go.